Good evening, everyone. This is Susanna Morgan. I'm Chief Communications and Development Officer for the Somerville Public Schools. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We look forward to updating you on our reopening planning work to date since the last town hall meeting. It's my pleasure to introduce Superintendent of Schools, Mary Skipper.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and welcome everyone. We really appreciate you coming tonight. We appreciate past participation in the town halls. It absolutely helps to give us clarity on what we need to be focused on and to do the best job that we can. Please forward. Next slide. So tonight we have both presenters and panelists. We have our mayor, who I'm sure will do his introduction in a moment. And actually, I'll ask the mayor to introduce the city side. For the school district, we have Chad Maza, who's our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. Ms. Carrie Norman, who is our illustrious school committee chair for the Somerville Public Schools. Dr. Davila, who is our director of our English language learning program, as well as our family and community outreach. Susanna Hernandez Morgan, who you met earlier, who's our chief communications and development officer, and our Director of Special Education, Christine Trevisoni, with us tonight. Mayor Curtatone.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Good evening to all of you who have tuned in and joined us this evening. Thank you. With us on this panel from the city side is Mr. Omar Bukili. He's the incident commander for our COVID-19 incident command system. He's heading the city's response to many different components of the response. Doug Chris, who's the Director of Health and Human Services for the city of Somerville, including overseeing the Somerville Board of Health.
Next slide, please. So in this town hall, much has changed since we last came together in a town hall. And that was after getting some additional information relative to the building evaluations and relative to our testing, which were two key elements that the mayor and our school committee and superintendent and myself all spoke about. We saw as keys to having a safe return for our staff and our students. And so we made the difficult decision to have all of our students in the first phase of the hybrid return fully remote as a way that we would have the time to be able to remedy the issues and make sure that the buildings and the testing are in place. As well as to continue to let you know early on that the all remote would be happening, and to have our staff be able to work closely with us so that we can implement all the suggestions that you have made that did not work back in the spring. And rather than have the kind of emergency response of a remote curriculum, to really have a robust system that works for our families and works for our students. As you know, we've worked and reported to you in a really transparent way everything we've been attempting to do in terms of readying the schools for an in-person return, everything from our PPE to our signage, to furniture, to storage, to using the outsides. These are all key things that allow us to be able to ready to take students and staff back safely. But the two key things that continue to need work and that I know the mayor and his staff will speak to are relative to the building, ventilation, filtration systems, and the virus surveillance testing that we hope to get into place as a system. One thing that's clear from staff, from you, and from our students is that we can't replace in-person learning with remote. It's a tough balance right now, but our health and safety of the students and staff and families in the community has to be our top priority to make the decision. And we are working our hardest to ensure both that the remote system reflects your feedback and is robust and a much better experience for our students and our staff, as well as being ready for the buildings for that time when we will be able to welcome our students back in physically. We know that this is extremely challenging for families. We have heard that clearly. There are no easy answers to this, and there's no perfect plan. But one of the things that we are trying to do relative to support for families is to look at options with our recreation department, with our community schools, and with some of our other youth providers to find ways that we can bring children together outside safely, social distance with masks, to be able to do activities that will help balance that social emotional mental health for them, will help them feel connected to their classes so that when they experience in the remote, they have those relationships. We're also actively working with our teachers union around how we can use the outside as a way to have staff and families and students come together so that students actually can start to build those relationships with their teachers so that remote learning is more successful. So with that tonight, we hope to be able to inform, and answer some questions. I know the mayor would also like to address, the initial phase of the plan.
Thanks, Madam Superintendent. And again, thank you everyone for your patience, your flexibility, and all that you've done to work together as a community to help us take on COVID-19. As we mentioned in previous meetings, the challenge of opening up schools in a way that ensures the health and safety of teachers, staff, our students, and the entire community, and in a way that is sustainable is a complex one. I've written articles about how there's a hot mess. And to do this right, there are two major areas we need to address to support the robust learning we all want to achieve, even in a remote world. But as we ramp up to hybrid, one, we need to address needs of our buildings that need to be adjusted to ensure that our air handling systems, our HVAC systems, some of the physical components of the classrooms and buildings themselves, ensure safe social distancing, proper air exchange, and again, a healthy and safe environment. The superintendent and I've spoken about this in the previous meeting. We've had some preliminary work done by engineers, and we've done an analysis of building assets. There are some buildings that are very challenging. As you can imagine, the present high school has the central building, which is one we are still occupying, dates back to 1895 with some changes that have been made over the years, but buildings like that, Edgerly and Brown are challenging. But for the most part, our buildings, the school buildings, are much better shape than city buildings. Still, there'll have to be adjustments, some investments to do some of the things as listed here, whether it's around air filters, again, having proper air exchange, looking at the HVAC systems, or eliminating commonly touched areas like plumbing fixtures with no touch features. And again, how do we for example, deal with the issue, keep doors open at all times, but still ensure safety as well as windows. And these are things that we're evaluating, have been evaluating, continue to evaluate daily, and will be part of a comprehensive plan to again make sure the building assets and the operation and maintenance of our physical plant ensure the health and safety of our entire school population. Next slide, please. As we're doing this, we are guided by science, we are guided by data, we are guided by expertise, and we're also evaluating many indicators and locally around the region, statewide, and even nationally. We're looking at the rolling average of positive cases, daily number of positive cases. It's important to recognize that today, Massachusetts, as of today, has seen a 50% increase in the number of positive cases, whether they're confirmed positive cases or probable. That is a data point that we pay attention to. We've seen spikes in different parts of the Commonwealth, and where you have clusters, you tend to have community spread. So paying attention to that, as well as our own cases here. We're looking at the Commonwealth's testing capacity as we think about how we implement surveillance testing, which I'll talk about, I've spoken about before, and I'll give you an update on that. People should understand that. I want to clarify that the Commonwealth today, its testing capacity has gotten incrementally better at best since the summer began. And we're seeing challenges today in terms of obtaining supplies to support testing, like reagent and other supplies. The contact tracing capacity of the Commonwealth is not where it should be. Locally, we have a robust contact tracing effort, but that needs to be supported also. Contact tracing allows us two things. One, it provides information and data real time for us about what is happening and how the pandemic is changing, especially any resurgent that may be rising, and allows us that sort of real-time information to deal strategically to contain any spread. We'll also look at how the pace of the trends are. What we don't want to be in a situation, as some have said, well, you should keep it under 5%, your positivity rate, but if you reach 9, it's a problem. By the time we recognize it reaches a high level of positivity transmission, positivity rate, it'll be too late. When you see it on the ground, it's already vastly bigger than it is. So again, we need to look at a variety of indicators and as a collective approach to understand what is happening. Again, we're still relying on expertise, epidemiologists, and the guidance of science and research to as we move forward. Next slide, please. The major component that we want to implement as part of the plan and will implement is a surveillance testing plan. As I explained before, and many of you probably heard this, either in the news, read about it, some of you have personal expertise in that. Baseline testing for the entire student population before we start any physical attendance of school. Teachers, staff, students, regular sampling testing of a certain percentage of our population on a certain schedule to understand how and if and how the virus is impacting the school community. We are working with different partners to achieve this, both the Cambridge Health Alliance. We've been also engaged with a Broad Institute, as well as the third party who will have to come in to support the front end of actually facilitating the testing as we develop the plan. We are still working on what the percentage, what we're still trying to understand, and we will nail down, is the percentage of the school population that needs to be tested and on what schedule that would have to be. This will be coupled and supported by other protocols such as contact tracing, which the city is doing and continuing that effort and continue to build it up, as well as any other mandates that come down from the Board of Health to ensure that, again, we're keeping our entire population, school community safe and healthy, and we're monitoring everything real time. Indicators that on a real time basis and inform us and allow us the flexibility and the leadway and runway to contain any outbreak in our schools as well as our community. Next slide. I'm going to hand this back to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as the mayor has thoroughly covered, the priority is and always will be the health and safety. Again, we're talking about a gradual return to in-person. In-person is still our goal, and to do it as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible. As you know, one of the things about notifying as one of the first communities early on is so that we really can focus on developing out a thorough model with the remote learning, working in partnership with teachers and other staff, so that we're able to address the issues that you experienced back when it was an emergency closure. And a main piece of this is the continuity of learning, and that is how do you move from remote to in-person, which is the hybrid model that we and other districts are looking to adopt. This has to be done, in partnership with the teachers to look at it, so that there is on the remote days continuity. We are also looking to some of our partners, which when we talk about mitigating impact to students and the families, we're looking at some of our youth partners like community schools and rec to be able to figure out how on the remote days to offer those opportunities and to have linkage between what's happening in the in-person days with the full remote days. This will be extremely important in developing out the full remote to start so that we can quickly and nimbly switch to the hybrid in person when it's safe to do so. This would have to be done regardless of starting all remote or not, because the likelihood that the virus will rear up during the school year, that there will be COVID cases, that there will need to be classes quarantined or schools shuttered for periods of time is a strong likelihood. And so therefore, educators and families being prepared to know what to do in those cases and moving back and forth between remote and in-person is going to be key. As you know, and if you've attended any of the school committee meetings, in terms of any of the changes of working conditions, of which this is, remote learning, in-person, partially, those are changes in working conditions. So we have to work in partnership with our unions, not only the teachers union, but our other unions, our secretarial union, our after-school staff union, food service, etc., to explain what those changes are, to be able to hear concerns and address those concerns in a way that makes a plan as collaborative that works for all, including parents and families. The remote curriculum planning, Mr. Mazza is going to address in the next slide, but to reassure you that we've heard loud and clear the feedback of what has not worked in the emergency closure. I don't think we heard a lot different from what has happened in other districts. It was an emergency period, and so people responded accordingly. We've now had time to prepare. We now have further time to prepare. And so the expectation is that our remote system will be far more robust, that live teaching will be a big piece of it, that schedule will be a big piece of it for the students, grading, attendance, all of the pieces that for districts and for families were very difficult to accomplish during the remote period last spring. Yesterday, the state announced and shared with the districts some information on learning management system opportunities. These are vendors that the state will procure with that will make it easier for us to be able to use. They've vetted them, they've looked at them to see which systems align best to our standards here in Massachusetts, to our scope and sequence. These are asynchronous systems. We would further support them if and when parents wanted with our own staff to be able to help support relative to academic support, or to be able to complement it with some social emotional opportunities while we're all remote or in the remote portion of the hybrid. We have had through survey, a good percentage of parents that are interested in this option. So we will be evaluating it. Again, got it yesterday. We will be evaluating it over the next week, looking at how it complements the various systems complement our flow within the school district. And then be able to hopefully offer some options here for parents that are looking for more asynchronous types of activities for their students, but still be able to stay within the district and gain credit. And then finally, just in terms of the mitigation, can't emphasize this enough, there's no way to take away this issue and sting. Students, need to be with teachers in school, and the fact that they won't be in person and they are going to be all remote means that families are now struggling to be able to find things for students to be able to do and have care. So we're doing our best, and we'll continue over the next several weeks to share information with you about partnerships with REC, partnerships with our community schools, our citizen schools partners, in an attempt to be able to create opportunities during the remote time for students that will complement what they're doing in their classes. So more will come on that in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to introduce Mr. Chad Mazza, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and I know that he has some information he'd like to share on the remote curriculum.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. So, again, we appreciate your input, through the surveys, through emails, through conversations that we've had. We really value that. And we knew going in that remote learning, was a definite possibility. It is a possibility even with the hybrid plan that we were looking at. And so we know from your input that what happened in the spring was reactionary, it wasn't developed as well as it should have been, and it didn't work in a lot of ways. So we knew going in that we had to create something that was far more robust. And one of the first things that we talked about is a different structure where there are consistent weekly schedules so that students and families know exactly what is happening, when math class is, when lunch is, when specialists are happening, when reading is happening. So that way you can plan around that consistency. We also know that daily attendance will be taken by teachers. The state is really focusing and will be monitoring attendance, even though most districts are going remote. So we will take attendance like we normally do when kids are in person. And grades will be different. We are looking to go back to something similar to what we have when students are in person. And we want students to know that your work counts. It didn't necessarily count in March, but it counts, starting day one of school coming up. We want to make sure that we have grade level specific and accessible instruction and materials for students. One of the big things we know is the relationship between teachers, students, and families is crucial in maintaining that connection. We want to make sure that everybody has a good relationship, and we're continuing to offer feedback and reaching out at various times on a weekly basis. Again, the teacher and student interaction, we know synchronous instruction, the live instruction, is the most critical, the most crucial, and has the most impact on student learning. So we're going to be looking to do a lot more of that with a focus on constructive small group and one-to-one learning, which is much different than what has happened in the past. Feedback is another crucial piece that students need. So giving more feedback to students to let them know what they need to improve on and what they're doing well in order to move forward. Another piece of remote learning that we really have to focus on is making sure that independent work is meaningful for students and it's supported with guidance from previous lessons. So it's connected to what has already been learned, and it's a way to extend those skills. And we're also looking at continued efforts to, ensure that all students have internet and have a device and are able to access what they need to curriculum and instruction wise. We're also looking at having consistent platforms across a district so that if you have kids at different schools, you're not looking at 3 or 4 different platforms. It'll be 1 to 2, and it might even be the same platform, which will make it easier for parents to assist and monitor. And we're also looking at providing professional development and training for families and for students to mitigate some of the issues that may happen. So, we are continuing to work hard. We are creating teacher teams and planning around instruction because we want to make sure that kids across the district are getting the same instruction, getting the same material. So that way, no matter where they are, they'll be getting a quality education remotely.
And so finally, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be rolling out some planning, working in partnership with Parks and Recreation. Again, we're trying to prioritize the youngest students, knowing that they are least able to access the remote, and then it really depends on the adult being there. So really looking to, by school, have cohorts of students that would be able to attend Park and Recs and be able to meet classmates, again, social distance, outside, masks, but to do it in structured activities, and then work our way up to the students who are in the older grades. And then we're also looking at other kinds of opportunities around academic support that could be done outside in the after school hours, community schools, and how they can continue to run their program in a way in the 3 to 6 block that is, again, supportive to parents. So there'll be much more development in this area and more information as we roll our plan out on Monday and then add to it over the course of the next several weeks. So I think at this point, we're going to transition to the questions. And I am going to attempt to help with this. So bear with me. So one of our questions is around if families choose the fully asynchronous curriculum option, so referring to one of the state options, will they still keep their child's assignment in their school for when the school when the schools start reopening? Or do you have to redo the lottery? So this is a great question. This is a question that we're actually going to take up at school committee on Monday because it has to do with assignment. I can say that my recommendation is going to be and has been that we consider this a 1-year emergency period. I think if we're thinking of students and families, keeping the students and families intact in their community school is the best option. But this does require dialogue, and so we will be taking it up at the Monday conversation. Another one, our children are suffering deeply from social isolation, particularly young children who cannot effectively communicate with their friends through technology. Can the district provide a specific idea of how they intend to address our children's social and emotional development and well-being through a fully remote model? So again, the goal is to get our students back because we do know that from a social emotional standpoint, students are struggling and will continue until they're able to be with each other. I think our attempt in working with partners like the rec and partners like community schools is to create some of those activities where students could come in contact outside safely, social distancing with masks, as a way to be able to get some of that interaction. Additionally, the social emotional component is going to be a big piece of the remote learning plan. We have a lot of PD that has happened and will happen for our counselors and our staff, so that this can be embedded within the curriculum of the remote, and it can be activities that can help the students to feel more connected and create more of a community online than was previously able to be done in March through June. So I appreciate this question, and it's one that is in our hearts as well. And I think we're attempting to do it in both of those ways. The next question is for either the mayor or Doug. What are the metrics being used to determine when in-person is possible for any at-risk cohort?
Well, I'm going to start and I'll let Doug jump in. We're developing these and we're working in consultation with epidemiologists and other experts so that to develop our indicators, and there'll be a series of them, and we'll make that available for the public. I want to also say this has been one of the most frustrating points for school leaders, municipal officials, because the state, Commonwealth, and the Department of Early and Secondary Education has given no guidance. And let me be clear, they have no plan. I chair the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition, which the coalition is 17 municipal leaders, the CEOs of everyone in the inner core of the metro region. In that meeting today, we also had the North Shore Coalition and communities across the metro area. And this is something we're demanding from the state. We need to understand, or the region on its own may do it, because you just can't have it on a community by community basis. It's not like our neighborhoods and our city boundaries, are hard. With the other, we're integrated into communities of Cambridge and Boston in terms of our boundaries, but there's no guidance as being kind from the state, and because there is no plan. Notwithstanding that, we will lay out the indicators we will be following to determine, when we ramp up the hybrid plan, or intensify that, or roll back. We need to have that.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I think I would, echo a lot of the same comments, and I think that's some of the challenges. And similar to, what the researchers are saying, and what we're looking at is multiple factors that will play into our decision processes. Talking about rates, the environmental factors that we already covered here in some of the slides, as well as our testing capacities that we have here, and the availability of those tests to make sure that if anything were to happen, we're ready to respond. So then you would also have to think about our contact tracing efforts and making sure that we have all of those things in place to ensure the health and safety of our students, our families, our community, and their staff. All of those things are really critical points when we start talking about looking at students and making sure that it's a safe environment for all of us.
That's great. Thank you, Doug. The next question, teaching our youngest students virtually in the spring was a complete failure. And to be fair to the teachers in the spring, remote learning for our youngest children doesn't even seem possible. Can the district offer any specifics about how they intend to improve the effectiveness of virtual learning for our youngest children? Mr. Mazza, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that, we found that we weren't necessarily doing very well in March was, around taking attendance, around grading. For our younger students, we want to make sure that they have more live face-to-face time, but it's not an all-day face-to-face hours at a time, because we know attention spans, and it's not necessarily the best thing to have, younger students sitting in front of a computer. We're building in this year a lot of independent recreational play. We're building in some exploratory for our younger students, so that way they can take what they have learned in their morning meeting and really explore around the house, outside, to get those experiences, to make sure that they are moving, because we want to make sure that we keep them engaged. We know we didn't necessarily have a lot of strong engagement strategies, back in March, but we are really actively working on them, because we know for our younger students, it's very difficult. And that's why we're looking at outdoor activities to really try to bring them in and have some face-to-face time with their friends. And we're prioritizing our younger students that when we can come back fully, come back in person in the hybrid, they're one of the first groups that will come back.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mazza.
You're welcome.
Is anyone worried about gaps increasing as affluent parents just create pods and get teachers for their students while other parents can't do that? Absolutely. I think the challenge is that parents are trying to do what they can to be able to address the childcare issues when they realistically have to work. I think our attempt to try to create, try to get our students back as quickly as possible by addressing the issues that the mayor laid out at the onset is our priority. That's what we're trying to do. But I think in the meantime, really trying to give options, particularly to our youngest students and parents, we see that as a responsibility and really as an entire community responsibility. So our hope is that we're able to have opportunities for all students to work and mix together through recreation, through CS, much as our classes are designed. So yes, we don't want, what we want to be able to do is keep all of our students. We do recognize that at day's end, parents are going to have to make choices relative to the childcare. So we just want to give every opportunity we can to have them be able to stay with us. Let's see, I'm trying to see non-pre-Ks. Given that a vaccine is not given, what happens if there isn't one? Are you and the STA planning for that? So, I mean, I will start by saying that I think what we've outlined relative to the building, ventilation and filtration and the testing pieces are not reliant on a vaccine. They're just reliant on safety. And so making sure that we can address those is our priority. I think as the mayor spoke about having metrics and laying those metrics out as to what will be deemed as safe, that is also our priority. I don't think anyone thinks that we can't return before a vaccine. That's not our goal. It's not our plan. But I think that, right now, I can't speak for STA. I know that right now, collaboratively, we're trying to work together to ensure safety of student staff and then to have a sound remote plan that includes a phase in of back in person as quickly as possible. Mayor, I don't know if you have anything else.
I think it's a great question, and you summed it up. We don't know when a vaccine, although there's promising, preliminary results occurring on several different studies and trials happening around the world. But again, a vaccine has to be developed, then it has to be distributed on a massive scale, and we don't know, and we still don't know if that's going to be to give us total prevention to the virus, or could it be like the flu where it mitigates the risk of becoming infected or the duration of it. So we can't hold our breath and wait for when that's going to happen because we just don't know when. I think there's a lot of optimism that will happen eventually.
That's great. Another great question. In addition to securing technology for students, such as Chromebooks and hotspots, has there been any discussion of bringing in more print solutions, such as textbooks, workbooks, and student work drop boxes? So absolutely. One of the things that we have been preparing for as part of the hybrid and will continue for the remote is to have supplies that students can have at home and supplies that students would keep in school. And these can range from general school supplies to small whiteboards, to math workbooks or reading books, having bags of the books, in addition to things that are specific to music or to art that students may need in order to complete assignments at home. So the plan is that those will be given out as part of the setup for the school year, in addition to the technology components. Mr. Mazza, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think, we know that that's could be a major barrier. And we actually had the conversation today, in a meeting about specifics as to what, students would have to have sent home. Like the superintendent said, math workbooks, general supplies, things that will make them more successful when they are home learning. We know that that's an issue, and we're looking to, replenish them throughout the year. So that's not just a one-time thing.
Great, thank you. As a KN1 parent, what if I decide not to do any virtual programming due to work, financial needs, and call it a year? What happens to my children? So options, we would like parents to look with us at how we might be able to make this work. But understanding it might not, you always have the opportunity to put forward a homeschool plan for your children. And that would go through Mr. Mazza and Mr. Mazza's office. Additionally, we intend to send out the information to parents around the virtual systems that the state has adopted to see if that could be a working solution for parents as well. So you can reach out to Mr. Mazza and he can help facilitate more information for you in making that decision. I'm sad to hear that we are starting remotely. Our numbers support reopening for vulnerable populations for whom the benefits outweigh the risks. What is the timeline for in-person return? It seems like there's no incentive or motivation to progress. So I think there's two parts to the question. I think one is around the metrics, which I think the mayor indicated and Doug Kress indicated. So we're working actively to be able to determine those. We have an environmental and safety committee that is now meeting weekly, and that will be one of, in addition to the health commission, that will be, one of the key committees that helps us to look at all the variables and decide what is safe. But ultimately, it'll be the health commission that will set those metrics. We very much have identified which populations we believe to be vulnerable, and we are working closely with STA on this. Special education, program students, not all program students, because some program students are medically fragile, so it might not be appropriate for them to come back in person at all. Our ELL, our levels 1 and 2s who are learning English for the first time, and certainly our pre-K to 2 students. And so they still remain our priority. And our hope is that even in outside activity and outside opportunity, we're able to prioritize those students and bring those students back first as quickly as possible in the hybrid as we're continue to work on the buildings and the filtration and the testing issues. Mayor, I don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah,
that you wanna...
I would like to, and thank you for the question. Look, we're all acutely aware of people's stress around this. I want my kids back in the Somerville public schools for a variety of reasons today. But we need to clarify some facts. One, even if the indicators we established today said they would allow for any part of the student population to attend school physically, the buildings are not ready yet. And we don't have surveillance testing up and going yet. The other important thing to keep in mind is there's been a lot of back and forth and information and confusion, even from experts, about the risk of transmission among students, especially our younger students. All we have are the lessons learned. So up until what has happened recently, we're watching in places like Georgia, around the world, everybody closed schools. And it's not till reopening we're starting to see some lessons. In Israel, we're seeing. We're going to continue to learn this as we evolve and move forward. What those lessons teach us or influence the indicators we are going to look to, because really there is a risk. The risk for us today and an unknown poses too much of a risk. Small numbers can flash the big ones. So I understand this is a good question, but so much of the information is getting turned upside down today as we speak, as some school districts are opening and we're seeing outbreaks even amongst young children.
So I'm going to actually stay on this theme. This is a question that it's come a different way, but I will ask this one that has a little bit more description. And this could either be for the mayor or for Doug Kress. When do you expect the health department will have numbers for the metrics they're developing to govern reopen? For example, what new cases per 100,000 will be used as a threshold?
Doug, I'll allow you to chime in. We haven't developed those yet. And I'd say it wouldn't be accurate or right for us to even guess at this point. And I know you're not asking that. We have to understand what level we're going to be guided by. Again, this is a frustration point for Somerville as a community and school district, and the other 350 cities and towns and other school districts in the Commonwealth, because Commonwealth doesn't have a plan around this. What is a safe level, what the indicators we should follow are. And again, we need to reconcile that against the lessons being learned in school districts around the world. and how the virus has impacted those students and those populations and being transmitted. We will have that for you. Those discussions are ongoing as we speak. I'll hand it off to Doug Kress to add to what I've said.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that that's a critical question to ask. And as you have said, we don't have the answers to that yet. It's something that we're working on. The state hasn't given us any guidance. We know that there is a little bit of guidance that are coming from CDC, but again, we don't have enough information. And this is one thing we do know about this particular virus and the situations we have been in for the past 6 months is that this is ever evolving and ever changing, and we're learning new things about it. I think we've already kind of answered some of the questions about it. This isn't just about a number. This is about a lot of factors that come into play. Do we have enough testing availability? Do we have the ability to test young people? I know there's another question in there about the types of tests that we may be using. And we're exploring a variety of test options that may be out there, not necessarily just the deep nasal, but some of the more anterior nasal swabbing that wouldn't be as invasive. If we can have those available. There are a lot of challenges that we have in front of us, and we're still looking and working to develop those. And again, as soon as we have some of that available, we're going to share that with the community as well.
And this is just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
And just one other piece I want to add to it, because it will not be one conduit of information or one data point. It has to also be have backed up by our ability to surveillance test. And for example, if we can test and get test results back like you can right now within 24 to 36 hours, that's good. But as one expert stated to the regional call I alluded to earlier today to all the municipal officials, if you have to wait more than 36 hours for that test result, other than letting the person know whether they have COVID, it's really futile in terms of containment and contact tracing, because those individuals are going to be spreaders out in the community. So there are many components to our approach to framing the health guidelines, protocols, testing, not just the supply, but the turnaround time of tests. And Doug mentioned sort of the rapid tests. Will those be available right now? Basic virus test that you get, we can turn around within 24 hours, and that'll be the goal. 24 to 36 hours, however, has to be the maximum timeline, as all experts would agree.
In that, keep in mind, the tests that we want to talk about are the PCR tests that we're really looking at within these. That's really our indicator. That's the gold standard is out there for that. That's what we want to look at. And it's an important piece to think about so that we do have accurate information and that we're not going off with some other types of information, and that we can keep our student population and our staff and our community healthy.
That's great. And there's just one other that's, will testing surveillance be pulled at any point?
So again, that's one of the options that we're looking at. The FDA has some of that information and guidance that's in there regarding pooling. Right now, their max pool is 5, but as these systems develop and as the accuracy develops and continues to grow on these, there may be some opportunities to look at that. So we're exploring that as well. When we get to the point of looking at surveillance, we have to look at how do we test everybody at the very beginning, and then how do we do that able to sustain our testing, and that may be around pooling. That's definitely an option that we would consider as we move forward.
That's great. Thank you, Doug. Will you be prioritizing in-person outdoor distance meet and greets with their new teachers to help get the teacher-student relationship off to a good start? Really appreciate this question. So this is something that we are actively talking with STA and collaborating about. One of the concerns with starting remote is this sacred relationship that exists between the family, the student, and the teacher. And there seems to be really good agreement and synergy on this, that being able to have some kind of meetings, whether they be initial, regular, where the student can see their teacher, the family can meet their teacher, see their face, interact, again, socially distant with masks, but outside in a safe environment, so that when they see them on the screen, they're familiar and they recognize them, that is going to be a really important piece to launching the remote model successfully. Can you explain why we have differed from so many other towns? Brookline, for example, has confirmed in-person 5-day for youngest and special needs. So I know this is a source of confusion. I think I think what has happened is that when you sort of look at the trajectory of plans as they've been released, they haven't always been negotiated. And so what happens is the plan, ideally, if this is what we want, gets presented. And then when it gets negotiated, or there's other factors that are brought in, like buildings or like testing, the plans necessitate change. You know, what we know is every district is different. Our school buildings are different. The setup is different. Our populations are different. And so in our case, with our buildings, even though our city has done an amazing job with investment in the infrastructure of our buildings, they're not pandemic proof. And so part of this is to really bring them to a standard that we can look at you and assure you of a level of safety that until that work is done, we can't. I think the other is the testing piece and the value that different communities may place on that. In our community, our mayor has been really clear from the start that testing needs to be a part of the solution for us to ensure that staff and students are safe. Mayor, I don't know, or Ms. Norman, I don't know if there's anything else.
I'll chime in and I want to let the chairperson say something, but yeah, that's spot on, Madam Superintendent. Great question, a fair question. It's a frustrating one, as I would use, it's analogous to what happened beginning of this pandemic. Somerville went to a mandatory mask order. Not every city and town did. We were one of the first communities to issue bold stay-at-home advisories and so forth. And what we've all said, including on the call today that I mentioned, we can't have 351 plans of varying degrees. We can't, and we can't have every school district doing something different, but that is the consequence when you don't have a plan led by the Commonwealth. So we're left with the responsibility to do what is best for our community. And I'd submit, I would compare if even communities are doing surveillance testing, the majority will not be. Experts believe we need to do that. And we're going to do what is best for our community, our kids, our teachers, our staff, and our general public.
I would speak from the school committee side. I am in constant contact with my colleagues throughout the region, and it is a lot of them are passing plans, but as the superintendent said, that haven't been negotiated yet, and then they're walking it back and they're walking it back. I know it's frustrating not to have a certainty of the plan, but we're not going to put something out unless we know what it is and we can stand by it. So as the mayor has said, there's been very little guidance from this state. Ironically, the commissioner of ed, Desi, is not meeting with school committee members until the day after our plans are due. It would have been much more helpful to have that conversation prior, to have that information inform the decisions. So it is, it's difficult, but I would also say that I would rather do it slowly, deliberately, and to be able to give real information as we go through this process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a bit of a longer two-part question, but I think it's a really important one. Many families in Somerville are forming pandemic pods. I loosely define a pod as a group of 2 or more families who break social distancing to meet in real life with each other while maintaining social distancing outside the pod. The purpose of a pod may simply be to socialize the children or adults, or a pod may be formed for childcare, where adults watch each other's kids or share a nanny, or for educational purposes. For example, some pods are hiring tutors or teachers. I worry pods may further create inequity in the district. Does the district or city have any advice or guidance for those of us forming pods? I would personally like to form a pod with another family in my child's class. When will those classes be available? So I think there's sort of several parts to this. One is potentially, it sounds like some advice relative to the health side of mixing or co-mixing. I will take the ed side. So in terms of the class lists, right now what we're working toward is to look at grade levels and to sort of keep the teachers at the grade level. Again, this was a point of synergy for us in STA as a way to be able to address this issue of families having systems outside of school and wanting to be able to have shared experience educationally. That way there's just more continuity across the grade level. The teachers are planning together, they're working together, and the class lists become a little less of an issue as we sort of find out who's coming back and who's going remote, they become a little bit less of an issue because it's a shared team effort. This is something that is actively being discussed right now. And so it's good to see the question, because I think it reinforces that this would be something that could be useful to parents. I think the other is more, the equity one we did speak about earlier, but I think the part about the mixing of the pod just as an idea, and I don't know if Doug or the mayor have any thoughts on that.
For you, may have heard.
Sound,
some
Mayor.
of this.
Yeah. So I think, forming those pods is an interesting concept, and we're hearing that people are doing that. I think that's going back to the whole idea of trust. And when you're talking about doing a pod and you're expanding, your pod, or some people call them bubbles, and where are those bubbles going and how far are we going? It is, I think that people are starting to do a lot of that, because we are people who want to engage with other people. We're a pack mentality. We like to be around other people, and that's an important thing for all of us. And a lot of us are missing that closeness and being able to be in relationship with other people close by. So I think it really does come down to some of that trust, and this is helpful with some of the social emotional opportunities that are out there. We have our families, and if we can stay and make sure that those are safe and continue to look at that, that is a trust issue that you have to have with those other families and those other individuals, and who are they then interacting with, making sure that they are staying safe within there. There can be additional risk, and I think if people understand that, but continue to practice those social distancing, wearing their face covering, washing our hands frequently, there are opportunities out there for people to consider moving it forward in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Kress. Another question. When will, this one I'm going to save for the mayor. What is the expected date for the start of the remote school? And similarly, when is the first day of school? So on Monday, we will be bringing the calendar adjusted forward. I think, as for those of you that were on the town hall last time, and we sent out an update, the state Department of Ed has granted every district 10 days and mandated that they use the 10 days at the start of the school year, recognizing what a big change this is going to be, the types of PD that teachers will need, the type of opportunity to work together and collaborate, so that whatever the form of the model is of learning, that they're able to be successful in it, in addition to being able to set up classrooms for in-person, be able to work on getting furniture out, all of the types of setups just magnified in the current pandemic situation we're in. So when you add those 10 days onto our calendar, September 18th is the first date. This has to officially be voted on by school committee. So we will be bringing the calendar, Mr. Mazza will, on Monday to the school committee for that vote. The remote learning would, in essence, start that same day, the first day of class. Other questions. So there's an interesting one here about fall sports, Mr. Mayor. So the question is, when will fall sports begin? When will we get an update on that? Is there a chance that there will be a change in practice schedule and programming? So again, we're waiting for an update from MIAA and from the state on this very question. I know that the mayor has been working with other mayors in the GBL. I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you have a further update.
Yeah, first, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
I apologize, folks. I was knocked off Zoom and may happen again. If it happens again, I will join on with another device. I have been engaged with major youth sports organizations across the Commonwealth and the governor's office and the reopening advisory board. The issue on fall sports, I was expecting an announcement earlier this week. To the question, could there be some adjustments? Yes. Yeah, and anything's possible. You could see the seasons flipped, and now we're just talking scholastic sports. They're youth sports. I want to distinguish between the youth sports and scholastic. Scholastic sports, as it deals with the schools, you could see the fall and spring seasons flip. We may see the fall season canceled, or parts of it, certain sports, that is currently be evaluated by members of the reopening advisory board, the medical panel specifically, and we expect an answer or an announcement any day. And we were expecting it to be candid early in the week. Hasn't come yet. So we'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next one, when can we expect teacher and class assignments for the kids, and has a daily schedule of classes been determined like Boston has suggested? So this is what we're actively working on with STA right now. So as that information happens, we don't want to have to change it. It will come out. Some of this is negotiable, and some of this is stuff that we have ideas, strong ideas about. So we will be working on that and getting that information to you over the next several weeks. Let's see. Some of these are good questions, but they're on the same themes as we've already talked about. One is on the high school. Mr. Mazza, I know this is, if you could just give an update on the high school. The point of the question is really around high school years being so impactful and important. And so what is the type of planning that's happening at the high school level right now to ensure that students will be well cared for?
Yeah, I can tell you that the high school planning has been pretty intense with department heads, teachers, counselors, because they want to make sure that they're in full support and supporting students in every way possible with remote learning. They're in the process of creating rigorous schedules for students. They're not complete yet and they have to be negotiated, but they know as well what happened in March wasn't our best effort, and they know that kids need to be taken care of, especially at the high school level. So they are intensely working on creating a robust, remote learning system that will be required for all students. It's not optional. Again, they'll be taking attendance like we normally would when school is fully in session, and there will be grading. The grading will be similar, although it hasn't been negotiated yet, but we're looking at having it similar to how in-person grading is, so that students know that the importance of this remote learning, which is far different than how it was in March.
Thank you, Mr. Mazza. So Mr. Mazza, there's a few other that are specific to the curriculum. Independent work for lower grades, how much parental feedback and involvement is expected, or involvement is expected?
So we know from, the survey that parents spend a lot of time with their younger students working on curriculum, working on independent learning. We're trying to have shorter blocks for students that are in front of the computer getting a synchronous lesson. The independent work will be related to what the synchronous lesson is, but I think it should be far less for parents, hopefully intense, than it was in March, because we've had more time to really plan for this. And I know Dr. Q has been working with the pre-K to and K and 1 teachers to really create feasible, realistic schedules for students and families, which is an important part.
I would also add that this is exactly what we're trying to work with some of the partners who might do some of the outside activities in recess as a way to be able to have meaningful activities where students can be reinforcing the skills, be them community building or actual academic skill that they are learning in the classroom, and putting it into a more of a project-based or an applied learning way. So that is one of the things that we want to work with our partners on, so that there's more continuity for the students and less responsibility for the parent. Another question, there was just a request if presenters could please silence the notifications in their devices. It sounds like that might be coming through. How often do you intend to test the youngest students, given that the test can be unpleasant and there is evidence that they do not spread the virus? So I don't know if Mr. Kress or the mayor.
I will start by saying we don't know yet. As part of our surveillance testing plan and framework. And Doug and Omar, you may want to add into that. I'm sure that is to be determined.
Doug, you want to go ahead and I can add?
No, if you could start with that. I had a hard time hearing what the question was with Mary.
So the question was for our youngest students, how often do we anticipate needing to test, given it's a very unpleasant test?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, yes, I realize it is unpleasant, and if anybody has had that done, it's something that we can do. It's just never an easy test to do. So that's why we're exploring other options that are out there, such as the anterior nasal, which is the shorter swab that just goes right inside of the nose. That's not as invasive as the nasopharyngeal, which goes further back and actually is in a deeper system. So that's what we're looking at to try and bring forward as an option for us.
Great.
I think
Omar?
the only thing I would add, Madam Superintendent, very quickly is there are various tests that may be in the pipeline in terms of approval by the FDA that would potentially give us the capacity to collect samples in a less invasive fashion, so beyond the nasal swabs. The other point that I really wanted to clarify, that the science is not clear when it comes to of science is not settled very clearly. We're always going to err towards the side of safety. I just want to make sure that it's clear.
Omar, can I just ask you to repeat that last statement? Unfortunately, you came through echoed.
So, as long as the science is not settled when it comes to children, regardless of their age, being spreaders or vectors of transmission, I think that the most cautious approach would be to err on the side of safety and wait until the science is clearly settled.
Okay, great, thank you. The next one, in what way is the district amending curriculum to reflect the repeatedly stated emphasis on the student's social emotional well-being? What content are you going to teach differently or additionally? So as you know, we have a second step. Additionally to that, we want to work as part of the PD with the teachers around how to be able to respond to students' transition and adjustment issue, as well as continued need when we're in a remote setting to be able to address emotional concerns. Having the counselor educators, the district-wide social worker, bringing to bear all of those resources as a way to support the teachers. The district-wide social worker that we've hired is to support staff to be able to address issues that they may be seeing with a student or with a class and come up with ideas of how they can embed within their class the kinds of lessons or activities that would help students to work out some of what they've gone through. Some of that will be, you know, depending on the student's age, natural transition trauma, and others will be other kinds of trauma that will require a deeper intervention. We've had students that have lost family members from COVID. We've had students that have lost their housing and are now living with different relatives. Or are homeless. We've had students who whose whole family has been impacted by the disease. And so it really ranges as to what some of the trauma is that the student's gone through. Big concern for everyone is that when students are not in school, and I think you see this nationally, abuse is often underreported. This is the reason why we kept in place our counselors throughout the remote, and we actually almost doubled the ability for families and students to have teletherapy and be able to connect with Cambridge Health Alliance, with our Riverside, with our Home for Little Wanderers. We intend and have budgeted to increase all of that to be able to address both the more severe trauma as well as what would be the natural transitional trauma coming back, having not been in school for the time that they have. Is there a fee for the Parks and Rec programs? Will it be coordinated with the school lessons? Great question. So I had a great conversation with the Director of Recreation today, Jill Latham. Can't say enough about her. This is in partnership with the schools, so the activities that would be happening during the school day, they would be part of school extension. Our goal, both for community schools and rec, is as much as possible to have schooling and the activities sort of go hand in hand with the needs. This could be as simple as us sharing the goals at the grade levels and at the school level what we're looking for in the activities, and then having rec kind of work in partnership with us, with our phys ed teachers, to be able to ensure that those happen. It can be as deep in community schools or in citizen schools, where there's like a natural layer that exists between the school the student's in and the teachers that the student's with, and that after hours experience. So we hope over the next week to two that we can map that out for parents. You can see what that looks like. We'll explain the process for which you can sign up for that. But we intend to try to have this be as close between the schools and these organizations as possible. This would also include Breakthrough, our calculus project, any of the other programming that we do that has some academic and social emotional component to it that's already in place. We again will look to help for the parents create further relief, either by additional remote planning or where possible to bring the students outside. Some other questions. If cases remain low, what is the timeline for implementing the fixes needed to progress to the hybrid? So Omar, could I ask you to take the building component?
Sure. Could you repeat the first portion of the question?
Certainly. If cases remain low, what is the timeline for implementing the fixes needed to progress to the hybrid?
Sure. So the outside consultant that we've got on board is looking at the various components of our building assets depending on their recommendations. They're looking at it from a holistic standpoint. So everything from touch surfaces to fixtures to HVAC systems, airflow, and ventilation. So depending on the building asset itself, the work required, and they'll make those recommendations, will be different. So it could include everything from small fixes that need to be put in place to pretty significant upgrade to our systems. So once we have that report, we'll be able to provide a timeline for each of the work that needs to be done for each building asset. And the timeline is in a matter of days now. So we're looking at a couple of weeks or less. Does that answer?
Great. I think that does answer the barrier
Other
relative
question?
to the buildings. I think the other question is around the other, which would be the testing. So I think maybe we can reiterate that one. Mayor, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, it's along the same timeline. These components are being developed simultaneously in parallel with each other. So we're having daily conversations with outside organizations that would support our efforts, whether it's Cambridge Health Alliance, the Broad, or again, another third party would have to be brought in to facilitate the front end of the testing. And at the same time, we're, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're being consulting with experts, medical and health experts around the protocols and of testing, how often, what percentage of our population and such. So, in that same time period will be, as I want to clarify again for folks, it's one coordinated plan, education component, the building and physical plan component, and the testing and health component, guided under the umbrella of the protocols and mandates and guidelines of the Somerville Board of Health and the Commonwealth.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. For the outdoor recreational activities you are hoping to provide, what do you expect will be possible from a capacity perspective? The rec department ran some really great outdoor camps this summer, but they filled up really quickly. Do you expect to have more capacity in the programming you are planning? So the answer is yes. We're in conversation with our director of recreation. We are looking to use not only the school fields, but we're also looking to use some of the larger fields as a way to be able to use full staff from recreation. Each keeping the 6-foot distance and the masks. Schools would range between 30 and 50, depending if you're using a field or a school site. And we're looking at an AM or an earlier morning and then an afternoon session. So we definitely expect to be in the several hundreds capacity relative to rec. Then when we talk about community schools is going to be running their 3 to 6 o'clock program. That will obviously have reduced capacity because of the social distancing outside. But nonetheless, that will also have several hundred students. We do want to prioritize the pre-K to 2, knowing that they're not going to be able to get the same experience on the remote. But beyond that, we want to ensure through our other providers, our Citizen Schools partners and some of our others, as well as REC, that there would be some opportunities for the middle school grades as well. So we hope over the next 2 weeks to have that mapped out for you and coordinated. One thing we have to coordinate is the outdoor green space, because as you know, we wanted to be able to create opportunities for staff, families, and students to come together, staff and students to come together, but we also want to be able to use it for these kinds of social emotional outdoor activity experiences. So we just need to make sure that it's all coordinated in effort, and that hopefully can be done over the next week to 2. Another question, is there a possibility that some classes at the high school will be canceled? So I think this is in reference to a particular class, as if like a particular class may not be able to be offered because of, say, low enrollment. Right now, the high school is proceeding to be able to offer the courses that they had students sign up for. There's always some flux that happens as we get closer to school, and we sort of look at students' ability to be able to take multiple classes that might conflict or be at the same time. Again, we are anticipating schedules for the fall. And so as a result, there would just be the normal process that would happen, where if a class ends up really under enrolled, then we might aim to cancel that class and offer something else, but not because of the COVID situation. This is much more just the normal flow of the high school. In terms of the high school itself, as Omar indicated, we should be getting additional data back on the high school relative to the main building and to the Edgeley building. And then after we get that, we will be able to update you as to what the plan looks like for our ability to address issues or to have an alternative plan for the high school. Mr. Mazza, I think this is one for you. How can younger students connect with strangers to deal with social emotional issues? I think this may be in reference to if you don't know your teacher, if you don't know your classmates,
Right.
How is that possible?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're looking at and working on, is trying to figure out ways to get younger students in outdoor spaces to meet their new teachers, to meet their classmates, especially the ones that they haven't met before, because we know that the social emotional aspect for younger kids is extremely important. We want to get kids in front of teachers as much as possible, and I think we're going to continue to plan and try to find ways to use our outdoor spaces at each building so kids can have face time with their teachers and their classmates.
Thank you, Mr. Mazza.
Christine raised her hand too, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, Christine.
Can I just add that we're also trying to work through professional development around how do you build a sense of community. And that's part of our PD work before we go into the remote, is really, we've got some great resources from Jessica Minahan and other resources on how do you build a sense of community even if it's remote. And I think there's some great opportunities there. That face-to-face would be great, but we have to balance them between the remote and face-to-face.
Thank you, Christine. This is a good one. Can you talk a little bit more about what taking attendance means? One of the big challenges we had last spring with my kindergartner, now first grader, was that he would just not be interested in what was going on and would quit Zoom. If I'm on a call or trying to work, I can't then redirect him to focus again on school. It seems impossible to both work and constantly monitor my child to make sure he's actually paying attention to what is happening in school. So this is a great question. We're waiting for some additional guidance on attendance from the state. We got some notification that different from the normal present or absent, there will be an actual present absent for remote. So we're hoping to get some additional guidance as to what can be applied when. What I would say with the youngest of students is that this, in addition to the schedule, we also realize that asynchronous will be important for parents, as well as student participation in the kinds of outside activities that we're going to offer. And so those certainly we will find a way to be able to contribute and count toward the development of the student, particularly in pre-K and K, where that is less of a compulsory issue relative to the state. But once we get some clarification relative to attendance and what we need to do for that, we'll share that with the parents. But this is a great question, and one that we know is not only one that Tim's asking, but one that other parents of pre-K and kindergarten will want to know. So parents have to be working at home in order to take them to these outdoor activities at the end of the school day. So the plan with REC is to actually offer the activities during the school day. And then community schools would continue to offer in the after school hours. So the idea is to have a menu that can also help parents, that if they are working from home, there's a place that students, particularly pre-K to 2, will be able to get some relief and go to and build their community skills. So it would be something that we would see as having an 8:30 to 3 for REC, and then community schools 3 to 6. This is what we're attempting to do so that there's lots of flexibility and opportunity for the parent side. This is a great question, and I will have to follow up on this one. I know not every district in the Commonwealth has decided as of yet to go fully remote, but is there any word on about school lunch SNAP benefits being extended? So this is a question that we will follow up. I will talk with Regina Bataldo about. What I can say is that for us, food security is a critical component to students being successful. So we will ensure that breakfast and lunch and grab and goes are still available for the remote days. And then when we return in hybrid, not only for the in-person, but for the remote days for the hybrid as well. We will continue to run our sites because we know they're just impactful and that families need them. But we will find this out and get some more information on that. I know Susanna Morgan can record that question. For younger students, is they're thinking about how to minimize parental oversight if there's more scheduling and live teaching. So I think, Mr. Mazza, if you want to talk about the engagement component.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're looking at is, shorter blocks for younger kids with the live synchronous teaching, and then some independent activities that go right along with the lesson that they were just taught. Because we want to make sure that, we have student engagement, and we want to make sure that kids are excited about what they're learning. And we want to try to take some of the burden off of parents. We know, in the spring, there was a lot of burden on parents, and we're trying not to replicate that because we know parents have to work, but we're trying to make more engaging activities. So that way, when students are in front of the computer or they're working independently, they're excited and really working on what they need to.
Thank you, Mr. Mazza. This is a great question. Christine, I know you're going to want to weigh in on this one. How are you accommodating children with IEPs and mental health disorders such as oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, ADD? What services will be put in place to help them, and afterwards, and who's running the Parks and Recs for the social needs? So in comparison, just thinking about community schools, one of the key things we did with community schools was to actually build a position that helps to be able to make this translation for students who have IEPs or 504s, and how to be able to better meet their needs out in different kind of structured activities. I would see us working very closely with REC similarly on this. Christine, I don't know if you want to speak to this specifically.
Yeah, I think that we've really put an emphasis on the social emotional, besides our usual stuff of our work with our school adjustment counselors and our counselors and our emphasis on it throughout the day. We're working on professional development around trauma-informed training and positive reinforcement and engagement strategies. Again, how do we make the instruction meaningful and engaging? One thing that we learned not only in the spring, but especially during summer school, that students tend to perform best when they're meeting with teachers either individually or in small groups. So we're trying to look at how we can not just have 20 kids on a Zoom call at the same time. It may be that there's times for kids to come together as a group to see each other, but how do you break that into, I guess, to use some of the language that's been on this, like pods of their own, 4 or 5 kids meet with a teacher, meet with other specialists or paraprofessionals to get some of that support in a smaller group setting where they can be more interactive and more engaged. We've also been working with our BCBAs and our outside providers to really enhance all of the supports that we have in place. So it's a pretty exciting time, and we're excited by the opportunities that we have in front of us to plan for.
Great, thank you, Christine. Could you talk more about the outdoor learning options you mentioned at the end? Will they be organized by the cohort students will be in when they eventually hopefully move to hybrid? Will they be available to all students or certain priority student groups? Will they start in September? Again, several great questions. So this is one of the things we have to coordinate around. We have to set this up so the students are by the cohort that they would be in for hybrid. Again, the system has to be able to move from full remote to hybrid back to full remote to necessitate whatever happens with the virus. So yes, we will be looking at keeping them in the cohort that they would be in, so that Monday, Tuesday, or that Thursday, Friday. The Wednesday, when Jill and I spoke, would be more open. So that would be something where they could just sort of do play options like they've done in the past around the city, shorter duration, as a further way, since that would be an all remote day relative to the schedule in the hybrid. The other piece of that, will they be available to all students? Yes. Our anticipation is to start again prioritizing the pre-K to 2, knowing that they are at least able to sort of access the remote. And yes, the plan is to start them in September as early as possible. Please talk about the high school. When will students learn their course schedule offerings? How many courses have been canceled? So as of now, no courses have been canceled. I think as Ms. Damaza spoke earlier with the high school, there's been active planning going on for the high school with schedules. The schedule itself is something that is part of the negotiations, and it's something that we have to work with our STA members on, and we are doing that actively, as in, tomorrow. So our goal is to try to get some of this information out to parents as soon as possible, just understanding that we have to go through that process. Are there any childcare options for school-age children whose parents can't be home every day because they are essential employees? Yes, so this is exactly what we're really trying to work on. Additionally, and again, no promises, but we are trying to work, Lisa Q, Dr. Q, who could not be on the call tonight, who is our early childhood lead. We want to look at the mixed delivery system across the system to see if there's any options for the youngest of students. So not the students that are currently enrolled in the system, but the youngest students ages 0 to 3, to see if there's some additional childcare support that we might be able to give to parents. So again, we hope in the next 2 weeks to be able to have some additional information on that. Continuing further partnership with Head Start, for example, or increasing our own capacity relative to internal daycare. There was a question in that I also wanted to, I can't find it now, but it was a really good one. It was a question about orientation for freshmen, and whether or not there's any opportunity for the rising 8th graders who are now freshmen to actually get to meet each other and to get to meet staff. I know that in the 9th grade experience that the team at the high school is talking about this and how they might be able to set this up over a staggered schedule so that students would have a sense of who's in the class, and also, again, to be able to meet their faculty outside social distance and masks. So that is something that the high school is looking to do. I think the rising 8th graders are a concern I know that I have as a high school person, because they had a very abrupt finish of their 8th grade. And now going into the high school, we want them to be able to orient as much as possible, and that's always difficult to do remotely. So we will try to complement that as best we can with some outdoor components to that where it is safe. Another question. In considering scheduling changes you mentioned for remote learning, can you be more specific on what this might mean for families? For example, are you planning to integrate synchronous class time with synchronous special time? So for students and families, these will happen in a coherent and streamlined way. So Mr. Maz, I know you've been working a lot on the schedule piece. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and the answer is yes. I mean, one of the things that we know is that the synchronous learning, does help and does promote student engagement. So we're actively looking at that because we know the schedules that we had in March didn't necessarily coincide with what families needed. So we are actively looking at that. And are making those part of our schedules as we speak.
Great, thank you. At the last town hall, you had mentioned that PD sessions were available to the teachers during the spring and summer months. Are they required of the teachers? Do you feel that the teachers will be prepared for more effective remote learning in the fall? So the answer is no, they're not required. We offered a menu, a broad menu, knowing that teachers were in different places and what they needed. Some needed specifically on the platforms. Others knew the platforms, but they needed to understand how to better construct a classroom. And some needed it relative to new curriculum that was being phased in, or social emotional strategies. So in the spring, we had a great deal of teachers, as in hundreds and hundreds of teachers participating in the PD, but it was voluntary. In the summer, our model has always been, because it's non-contractual time, that teachers can choose what PD they want. So we have concentrated our PD based on your surveys and on the surveys of the teachers as to the critical needs areas. So these, again, come down to the social emotional, which we took a lot of questions about, relative to the teaching and creating a community, which is very different doing it online than it is in the classroom, relative to equity, and how to be able to, in a remote setting, address issues of inequity for particular populations, and then content specific on platforms, on the actual platform technology. And we, again, had tremendous turnout over the summer, but again, that is not required. What we're working right now relative to negotiations is on something that would be required for teachers, so that all teachers are taking similar PD during the 12 days that the commissioner, the 2 days we had scheduled and the 10 days the commissioner has granted, that would be more consistent for all of the teachers, and that they would all go through some amount of PD that is coherent for them, for what they and their school need. So that is something that we are actively working with them on through the negotiation process. Yes.
Mary, could I chime in just for a
Certainly,
second?
Sarah. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's related to what you're saying about the professional development and lessons learned, and to what Christine was saying about our special populations. We did have the experience in the summer of bringing in our special populations for remote learning in summer programs for special education students and the summer program for English language learners. And we were very successful, I think, more successful than we thought we would be in the challenge of engaging those students who have not been as engaged in remote learning. And one of the things that we realized is that we could schedule counselors, we had a spell counselor in our academic synchronous learning session. And it was very supportive in motivation, engagement, and participation. So there are things that we can do in the remote learning setting that actually is value added to the physical environment, which is very exciting when we think about that, looking at what the opportunities are for the remote learning.
Wonderful. That's a great addition, Sarah. Thank you very much. This one here, is there a way for I appreciate this one. It just starts off by talking about having a good experience in the spring, and asking about the teachers in the class lists. And again, this is something we're talking actively with STA about the grade level, so that teachers will see students can see a team of teachers, and parents can see a team of teachers, and there can be more coherence across that team. But the question is there a way for families to help virtually? Will our principals communicate these opportunities? This came up in the spring, and it's wonderful to see it again. There will be ways for families to be able to support and to help. And we will coordinate, as we usually do, through the principals. So there's always volunteer opportunities, and then there will certainly be some opportunities relative to the classes. So we will make sure that principals are able to seek that out from you, for anybody that's able to do that and willing, and give some ideas about what some of those volunteer opportunities could be. Even if it's determined that students can return to in-person learning in schools, will there remain an option to keep some children fully remote for the entire fall or whole year? So the answer is yes. DESE has said that parents have this option. No one's going to be forced to send their child in person. That said, attendance will be taken. So it has to be with a commitment to be able to access the remote curriculum. We will be sending information out on what the remote options are relative to the state that we would be offering as a district for families that know upfront that they want to stay remote for the year. Another participant asked earlier, is there an option for a parent that once they start, say they start full remote, and then the virus, and things change in their family circumstance and they feel they want to go in person, can they do that? Similarly, if you start in person, when we are in person, and then you choose to go full remote, we would be able to do that. And one of the things we're working on is having particular points, likely quarter points, where several times a year, parents can make that option to go back and forth. Because full remote will be really different for the year relative to a hybrid, we need to have certain points where that happens. It can't just be on Monday someone shows up. So we, again, know that is, parents want to know what their choices are, what the flexibility is, and we want to make it as flexible as possible. But we also want to make sure that the student can transition successfully. Will student attendance for high school students be required? Yes, it will, as will grades. Some teachers in the spring offered work that could be printed at home, so children had less time on the screen. What if you don't have a printer? Is there a place for the district to print copies that could be picked up by families? Yes, this is something, so in terms of the handing out of materials, we'll be doing that. This is something that the teachers have actually asked us about. And so we will have facility open within the building to do printing, so that families that are requesting print can work with their teacher to see that they can get some of that. And we'll hopefully have that at multiple sites so that it's convenient for parents. I am recognizing the time. I'm going to take just a couple more questions. When will the academic calendar be finalized? Will there be a delay in the start of the school year? So Mr. Mazza, do you want to address that one?
So the academic calendar, we are going to bring 2 iterations of it Monday to school committee to take a look at. So hopefully by next week that is finalized, and it will be delayed a little bit based on the state's 10-day, for us it's 12 because we have 2 days built in already, planning period. So it will be delayed just a bit.
Okay. But it will be brought to vote on Monday.
Yes.
To the school committee, and the day that we will be bringing forward is September 18th as the start of the academic year. What happens to after-school programming once we move into the hybrid model? Will they be running on a hybrid model of some kind as well? Wondering about El Sistema in particular, but also more generally. So yes, so for the after-school for CS programming, community schools, that would also follow hybrid. They have to have a reduced number of students. They've been running a summer program outdoors, and it's been very successful, keeping the student number lower. So their capacity will be reduced. They are also looking at hiring more staff. And again, if the facilities outside allow it, we will be able to do a bit more there for capacity to help parents out. In terms of El Sistema, this is an interesting question. So there are specific guidelines around music. Instrumental, wind instruments, but also singing choir. So this is something that Rick Saunders, who directs our overall music program wonderfully in SPS, will be deeply engaged in as to what we will be able to do relative to El Sistema, whether it will need to be remote or whether there could be for some instruments in person outside. So that is something that he will actively be working on. So I'm gonna end with this one, and I think this is a Mayor or a Omar question. Are the ventilation issues surmountable? Apologies if this has already been entered, but is this a non-starter? Will the report be made publicly available?
Let me start, and then I'll hand off to Omar. The report will absolutely be made public. In some cases, and we're able to find a report, in most cases, they are surmountable, and Omar, correct me. And some, it'll be a question about what will it take to be surmountable? Will it take so much time that it, such as the high school, it may not be a cost benefit to it. And we're trying to understand that. I'll let you take it from there.
No, I think you're on point, Mayor. I think most of our issues are going to be surmountable. The devil is always in the detail, and it'll depend on not just the time it would take to.
Omar, I think you need to lean into the machine. You're in a little bit of a dead zone there.
To upgrade or reconstruct materials, gear, or filters in the machine. Did you lose me?
We did. It was just a little bit. It was just a little bit underwater. Do you think you could just try that once more, leaning in, maybe?
Yes. So, maybe this is better. So I think the last piece of the comment I was making is at the end of the day, it'll also depend on our ability to procure the right materials, considering that everyone is trying to get their hands on the same type of gear and machinery and assets. But I would echo the mayor's comment.
Yeah, and I would say, Superintendent, it's not going to be a question of we'll invest what we have to invest to prepare the school buildings. Let me put it that way.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. So with that, I'd just like to thank all the panelists, the parents as well, for your questions. Anything that wasn't answered, we will work to get an answer to you. We're developing the FAQ from the other town hall and the multilingual that took place earlier tonight. But again, thank you very much. We're going to do our best to work with you and to try to provide and solve the problems that we can. We very much want to have the students in school. And so the quicker we can get back, the happier we will all be. But in the meantime, we will make sure that what you experience is not what you experienced back in the spring, and that it meets to the rigor and to the expectation of what the parents and the staff have asked for. So with that, thank you very much, Mayor.
Yeah, I just want to echo those comments. Thank you to all of you for your patience, your flexibility, and your cooperation about this crisis. We understand, we're very aware the impacts it's having on all of you, your children, your families, our community. And we're gonna work hard together. There will be no stone left unturned. It won't be a question of investment. And we're gonna get through it together. I do want to specifically thank also the staff, the teachers, the administration of the schools, and everyone in the city's team for doing what they're doing, working outside their comfort zone in most cases to keep the community safe. I also want to recognize our elected colleagues on this meeting tonight, Strezzo from the City Council, Sarah Phillips, Ward 3, Andre Green, Ward 4, Laura Breton, Ward 5 for the school committee, and also, of course, Chairman Norman. And thank you all for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Stay safe.